Hi, I'm Nick.
And I'm Helena, and we both work at the MS Trust, a charity for people affected by MS in the UK. And we're here to help you make sense of MS.
Thanks so much for listening to our podcast, Multiple Sclerosis Breaking It Down. This episode, we're going to be focusing on diagnosed with MS, and we're going to look at what will happen next. So, why this topic? Well, the past few years and months have been unlike any other in so many ways. Not only have we had all of the COVID restrictions, worries about job security, now the cost of living, people have had to contend with so many things in their lives recently. Add on huge delays in seeing doctors and specialists, and we can find ourselves in quite a difficult situation. It used to be the case that if you were diagnosed, you would then be seen fairly swiftly by the MS team.
Well, on paper anyway. I remember when I was diagnosed back in 2007, and I think I had to wait 2 months to see my MS nurse. And I had question coming out of, everywhere. This is actually how I came across the MS Trust. While I was waiting for my appointment, I ended up on the MS Trust website, mstrust.org.uk, and I pretty much just read the whole A to Z. The website looked quite different back then, but it was still good, even back in those days. But yeah, it actually calmed me down quite a lot. But bringing it back to the delays that we're currently facing, it means that a lot of people that are newly diagnosed are sat at home with a lot of questions and no health professionals to ask the questions.
Yeah, so hence this episode of our podcast. So later on, we're going to be chatting to Corinne from our inquiry line, and we're going to see what questions they get from people who've been newly diagnosed, what sort of responses they would normally give them, and what kind of information they would share with those people.
And we're also going to be chatting to athlete Lina Nielsen, who was diagnosed as a teenager. You might well have read about her last summer when she spoke out about her MS diagnosis, when she was in the middle of competing for Team GB in 4,000 meter hurdles.
It's incredible, isn't it? Absolutely incredible. So let's share some facts about MS with you first. So MS is a disease affecting the central nervous system, which is the brain and the spinal cord.
And it's estimated that around 130,000 people in the UK have MS.
Every week, around 130 more people are diagnosed.
And it's nearly 3 times more common in women than it is in men.
Yeah, and we know that most people are diagnoses, but it can be also diagnosed in younger or older people too.
And MS isn't infectious or contagious, so you can't catch it or pass it on to other people.
MS is the most common condition of affecting young adults.
And MS is a lifelong condition, but it's not a terminal illness.
And it's also worth noting that everyone's MS is different. So no two people will have the same range or severity of symptoms, even if they're even closely related.
And MS is more common in countries further north or south of the equator, but it's just as common in Black people as it is in white people. So MS doesn't discriminate, I know some people say.
Yeah, absolutely. And MS isn't inherited, but family members do have a slightly higher risk of developing MS.
So if you have been diagnosed with MS, you might wonder, what happens next? What's next for me? You could be feeling a range of emotions about the diagnosis and be wondering if that's normal. You may be concerned about how life may change or unsure on who you have to tell. To find out a few of these things, I spoke to Corinne from our inquiry lines earlier on. Should we have a little listen? So today on the podcast, we are talking about newly diagnosed, and we thought what better way to actually talk to someone who works on the inquiry line and answers these questions that you would get from newly diagnosed people. One of the things that I do at the MS Trust, and Nick does, is we go through a lot of the social media posts that we get and questions there, and then we send them on to the inquiry line. But the inquiry line also answers lots of phone calls from people. And today I'm with Corinne, who is a person who works there. So I'm going to hand over to her. Hi, Corinne. How are you?
Hello, Helena. It's Corinne here. Yes, I'm fine, thanks. How are you today?
Yeah, I'm doing well. So we're going to be talking about the newly diagnosed today, and I'm guessing you are getting a lot of phone calls from newly diagnosed people on the inquiry line.
Yes, we do. Yes, I mean, some people call us just straight after their first appointment with the neurologist. Literally, will be told by their GP about our inquiry line number, and they'll come straight away and literally call us straight away. So yes, so some people can be a little bit upset, some people can be very shocked, and some people are also quite relieved that
Yeah.
they feel a sense of relief that they know what might be causing their symptoms finally after sometimes quite a long time.
Yeah, that makes sense. So if
Yeah,
I was a newly diagnosed person and I'd called up
yeah.
the inquiry line, I'm guessing one of the first questions would be like, I'm newly diagnosed. What do I do now? What's next?
That's right, yes. And I think we often try and tell people just take a bit of time to digest the news. There's no rush. It's something to also let yourself experience a range of emotions. Um, People can, like I was saying, can feel a sense of relief, can feel in quite shocked. And there's no rush. It's about taking your time to come to terms with those thoughts. And eventually when people feel ready, I think, like we always say to people, information is power. To try and read up and start the ball rolling with some reading and looking into things, and just I think that can sometimes help people feel a little bit better with when they start reading about it, and reading what to do. And yeah, and they'll come to us on the phone, and then we can start talking through things with them. Often we do signpost them to the newly diagnosed section on our website. It's a really good section. It covers absolutely everything, from those first feelings through to who to tell, what to do next, many things like that. So that's what we try and tell people and signpost them there.
And that's also available as a booklet that you can order from the website, isn't it? It's called Making
That's
Sense of
right.
MS. Yeah.
That's right. Yes, there's a core book that's an A4 core book called Making Sense of MS, which is a really good introduction to MS, and it's got lots of key information. There's also a smaller one as well, a version of it as well, but they're both available on the shop, on our website to download as a PDF file, or you can order a free printed copy. And the shop is on our website, and it's in the top right hand corner of the website under the word shop, and you have to go down under view publications, and it's on there.
That's right. Um, you mentioned telling people. Uh, Are there any people that you have to tell that you have MS?
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually, because a lot of people think that they have to tell their employer. You don't actually have to tell your employer at your work. What I always say to people, some people feel comfortable maybe in telling their direct line manager, or a very close colleague. And often what happens is they might go on to tell other colleagues later down the line when they feel comfortable to. But actually, you don't have to. You're not legally required to tell your employer. I think what I do say is it's quite nice to be a little bit transparent from the beginning, so that if you need time off for appointments, because you might need an appointment, some time off for an appointment. For example, you might need to go for an infusion therapy. You might need to book in to see your MS nurse, or so, and a neurologist appointment as well, because hopefully, a lot of them are face to face again now. So it's really up to you who you tell in terms of work. Somebody that you must tell, you do have to inform the DVLA. If you drive, okay, and that's if you drive a motorbike, a van, a lorry, a car, HGV. We have some HGV drivers that have called up. That's because it's a notifiable condition.
Hmm.
So you have to let them know, okay? And what I would say is I always tell people not to panic. It doesn't mean to say you can't carry on driving. What often happens is you will get issued a shorter license. And they can come in the form of 5, 3 or 1 year licenses, and that you go through the process with the DVLA. Now you can notify them by phone. They do get quite busy, but you can notify them by phone, or there's a form that you can fill in online, and I believe they're a little bit quicker when you fill it in online. Okay.
That's useful.
Yeah.
You mentioned MS Nurse. Will you automatically sort
Yes.
of get an MS Nurse? What happens with that?
Yeah. Yes, of course. Yeah. So the MS specialist nurses that are based all around the UK, they're a person's first point of contact when they're diagnosed with MS. Now, the referral to them can sometimes take a little while. I always tell people just to, you will hear from them eventually. It's probably worth making contact with your GP and asking your GP to make that referral to one, and the GP will know about who they are. Some MS nurses you can refer to. So what I would say is if you're in any doubt about the details for your MS nurse, give us a call on the helpline. The number to call is 0800 032 38 39. And we have a map that we can have a look, and it tells where all the MS nurses are located around the UK. And as I said, some you can self-refer to. So that means that you can call them directly and you're not left waiting for any waiting time. What I say to people as well, if you haven't heard, don't feel that you're pushing, be a little bit pushy. Make sure that you call your GP and say, look, I've not heard from my MS nurse yet. Say if it's been a month, give them a call and say to your GP, I've not heard from my MS nurse. I really want to make contact with them. And like I mentioned, they're the first point of contact to go to with any MS symptoms, to talk about MS symptoms, to let them know if you've got new ones happening, to possibly check if it's a relapse in the early days. Sometimes people aren't sure if it's a little bit of a flare up or a pseudo relapse or a full on relapse. So, it's worth just keeping them, and also it's worth creating that relationship as well, and getting to know them a little bit, because they are there for you.
Yeah.
And I always say, do contact them if you've got any doubt. Some you can contact via email, and some you can contact by calling. Always leave a message if you call them. Make sure that you leave a message for them, and then they should get back to you fairly quickly. So it's worth, and some prefer email methods. So right, if you can, or even if you put in the email, can you please give me a quick call? If you're a bit poorly to write a whole long email, please just give me a call.
Brilliant. And obviously, as part of the sort of wider MS service, you also have neurologist. You were probably you should have been diagnosed by a neurologist.
Yeah.
How often are you likely to see the neurologist after you've been diagnosed?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because I think to be honest, in answer to that, it does vary from person to person, because as we all know, everybody's MS is very different.
Yeah.
Now, if the MS is more active, and they want to check on with running an MRI scan, they want to check on any lesions, they might decide to run an MRI every 3 months, every 6 months. Sometimes it depends on the monitoring when you're put on a form of treatment, disease-modifying therapy, disease-modifying drug. Usually, most people will see their neurologist once a year. Okay, if you haven't heard, I would push and push a little bit and say that you'd like to have an appointment with your neurologist. That's right.
That makes sense. So you mentioned treatment, and I
Yeah.
guess that must be one of the most common questions that you do
Yeah.
get when you're diagnosed. Should you get on a treatment? What are the treatments? What
Yeah.
different treatments are there? Because it's a bit of a minefield, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It is. And yet treatments come for people with MS, they come in two forms. So you've got the symptoms that people deal with on a daily basis, which might be nerve pain, tingling, spasticity, spasms. There are medications for that. And that can come in a form of usually in a tablet. That treatment is what we call a symptomatic treatment, and that's to help manage symptoms. But some people prefer maybe not to be on a medication, but they prefer to choose a lifestyle choice, and they choose it by diet, complementary therapies, massage, exercise, as we know. Helena, you love your exercise, which is really great. It really helps with fatigue. So there's so many different therapies out there that can help with managing symptoms as well as medications.
Yeah.
Then you've got, just like you were saying about treatments, some people get a bit scared because we know that there's not a cure for MS currently. There's so much research going on though. But now, 20 years down the line, there are a range of disease-modifying drugs, or
Yeah.
what some people hear as disease-modifying therapies,
Yeah.
disease-modifying treatments. There are a whole range for people, mainly for relapsing remitting MS.
Yeah.
There are treatments that are there to slow down the rate of progression of people's MS and to stop relapses happening. So they are a form of, almost like, I tell people to try and think of them as a form of therapy, because they're there to help with your MS for the future in some ways,
Yeah.
slowing down any rate of progression and stopping relapses, slowing down any rate of disability as well.
Yeah.
And there are a whole range of treatments. Now, please don't feel worried about calling us on the inquiry line. We speak to people that want to change a treatment, that are down the line and have tried one and want to move to a different one, for people that are just starting a treatment, and for people that have got to decide on a treatment.
Yeah.
It's quite daunting. What I tell people, it's quite daunting when there's a range of treatments to try. For example, if someone has cancer, they are put on a form of treatment. With MS, you might be given, narrowed down, a form of 3 different treatments, and gone and told to go away and have a think about them. So it's a little bit, it can be a bit daunting, but
Yeah.
try not to feel daunted. Narrow down your choice. You can use our MS Decisions Aid tool to compare different treatments, and also do a bit of research. We've got each drug, DMD, has got a individual website page on our amazing website. So it's more about looking at those and doing your own research, having a read through. Some neurologists are very helpful, and they'll give a few to narrow it down. So they'll
Yeah.
have a little choice and be told, these are the good ones that we think would be suitable for you. And it's a very personal decision. It depends how active your MS is, which one they think might be suitable. And they come in different treatments, and in an infusion, an injection to self-inject, or a tablet.
Yeah.
So it's also choosing one that fits with your lifestyle as well.
Yeah. And I mean, we see, especially on the
Yeah.
Facebook group, we see so many people
Yeah.
that come on and sort of say, oh, these are the choices that I'm being offered,
Yeah.
and then
That's right.
ask for advice. And I always kind of make it feel like, if you're thinking of going away and you're booking a hotel, you would go and look at the hotel
Yeah.
website, but
That's
then you
right.
would go on TripAdvisor, so you would ask
Read the
other people
reviews,
for,
ask.
yeah.
That's right.
And
That's
and and I
right.
mean that the Facebook group is great for
Yeah.
hearing what people found out about the treatment. But the
Yes.
important thing to remember there is that it is one person's account. So
Yes.
it just
Yes.
because somebody had a great experience or a really bad experience
Yeah.
doesn't mean that that would be the same for you, will it? So
That's exactly right. And no, and I totally agree. I always signpost people to the Facebook group, because it's a good way to reach out in a non-medical way and
mm,
find out what other people's experiences are from that particular DMD.
yeah,
Absolutely. It's a good non-medical approach, but of course remembering that someone might have got on very well and experienced a few side effects. Other people won't have any of those side
yeah,
effects. Everybody's very different and
yeah.
unique. Yeah.
Yeah, and as it's so many to choose from, I think it's
Oh, there's
really
quite
important to do
yes,
your research
that's
beforehand,
right.
isn't it?
Yeah. And more coming through all the time. They're
Oh
still
yeah,
researching others that are at phases of testing, and that's right. But they are also very well tested on clinical trials as
yeah.
well. They undergo a lot of testing. Yeah,
Yeah, no, it takes a long time from them
it
for
does.
coming from the sort of idea to actual
Yes.
fruition of these drugs. They
That's
take
right.
years and years and years. Um, Obviously there's so much to think about
Yeah.
with these things like treatment and what's
Yeah.
what's happening in the future. You might know somebody who has MS who's got it, I don't know, quite badly, or you might know
Yeah.
somebody who has MS quite very lightly.
Yeah.
It's hard not to sort of compare with others.
Yeah.
But a lot of people are sort of worrying about the future. So
Yes. Yeah.
what do you tell people that are really worried, or what they
Yeah.
can do about their anxiety?
Yeah. Anxiety is a big one, because it's generally, many people get anxious anyway, with general everyday life, and then you throw in a health condition as well, and and diagnosis with MS. It's natural to worry. It's also natural because it's anxiety is a symptom of MS.
Mm,
So yeah, you're totally right. So with anxiety, we do have a very good page on our website that has some top tips about dealing with anxiety. I think it's worth trying to take a day at a time,
Yeah.
not looking too far ahead. We know MS is not, I tell this to people, it's not a fatal condition. The general lifespan of somebody with MS is roughly about, I think it's about 5 to 7 years less, but that doesn't even mean to say that time would actually affect that person.
Yeah.
I think we always try and tell people to encourage people to carry on with their hobbies, things they love doing, because that's a way of doing something you really enjoy. Um, Obviously, if things become a struggle, then it's maybe a way of adapting to carry on doing that hobby. Because there's so many tools and different things, no matter what you love doing, that can be we can signpost you to for organisations that can help to carry on doing those hobbies. Um, I think also it's worth looking at some complementary therapies. People quite enjoy mindfulness. Now that can come in a simple form of an app on their phone. Also, we do suggest counselling to people. It's worth calling our helpline, and we can give some advice about counselling. We're obviously on our helpline. We're not medically trained, and we're not counsellors. So, we're not trained therapists, but we do speak to lots of people every day. That's what I try and tell people. And I think actually counselling, they are trained therapists. They know how to break down problems and deal with them,
Yeah.
and make them a lot smaller. So, Helena, I'd suggest counselling if people are struggling to deal with it. Trying to get good night's sleep as well, because when you don't sleep as well, that affects your general everyday mood. Lots of different things, but there's complementary therapies that you can look into. Sometimes people try cognitive behavioural therapy as well. And also, as we know, I'd say this again with you, but exercise is a huge mood booster. It can give you some good feelings, and that can come in any form. It doesn't have to be running a marathon. It can be swimming. It can be walking your dog, getting some fresh air, getting some sunlight, and trying to feel good about yourself in different ways.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And I guess in the
yeah,
same way as you were saying about taking the
yeah,
DMD to sort of future-proof a little bit,
yes, that's right.
doing exercise and doing all these stuff, it might not sort of work on the symptoms that you're experiencing now, but it will put into your health
Yes,
bank
yeah,
for the future, and it
that's
will
right.
make you feel better for longer, I guess. And I
That's
guess
right.
instead of sort of watching exercise as,
Yeah,
oh, I have to do
yeah,
this now, but actually it's
that's
like, well,
right.
this is me investing in my
That's
future
right.
by doing exercise and maybe eating a bit healthier and
That's
all those
right.
sort of things.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think also, can I just say that we sometimes hear people where it's really affected them quite positively, because it's taken them a turnaround to look at what they're eating, look at their
Mm.
diet. There are different diets that some people follow as well, but that's not essential. It's about getting all those vitamins and fruit and veg, and like you say, exercising helps the muscles, so
Yeah,
that can sometimes help people with spasticity and spasms, and stop deconditioning happening. So it's that whole phrase: if you don't use it, you lose it.
yeah,
And I think that's really important to keep in mind. But also, it makes you feel really good, and that's for anybody. So many people I speak to say it makes them feel really good, and it gives them that mood boost, and that links back to anxiety. Helps with the anxiety. It can help you just sort of channel some thoughts as well.
yeah.
Yeah. Mm,
I think today or yesterday, we put out a new research update,
yeah.
which was about stopping smoking and
Yes.
progression. I'm guessing you might get questions about smoking as well. Is
Yeah.
this what do you say to people about this?
Yes, yeah, that was an interesting research article that Janice published on our website yesterday. Actually, I think it went out, and yeah, I think it's a really difficult one, because some people like having a drink, some people like smoking, some people like vaping. I think it's an investment for your future. I think it's worth bearing in mind that you're right. Quitting smoking is one of the better things you can do to stop MS progression. Um, you know, there's ways of seeking help with that. I know at my doctor's surgery down the road, they have a whole spread at the moment about quitting smoking. So there's
Mm.
various patches you can take, and sometimes it might just be about easing yourself off it gradually.
Yeah,
It's not caffeine and smoking; they're difficult things to come off of, and I think it's worth bearing in mind that if maybe cutting down from smoking, maybe moving to vaping, and then vaping is less harmless, but it's still possibly a trigger factor, and possibly
mm.
an irritant for lungs as well. So I think all those things in moderation, and trying to stop smoking to help stop the progression of MS. Some people talk to me and they say that they love they love a glass of wine every now and again. That's great. It's you can't deny yourself with all these things, even sugar, cakes. We all love cakes.
Oh, we all love
So
cake.
yeah, we do at the MS Trust as well. But I think you're right. I think if you can, trying to avoid quitting smoking, because it is an irritant. And there has been research done to show that it can speed up progression of MS as well. So if you can, trying to quit, and there's various ways you can try and stop smoking. And Rome wasn't built in a day. It's not always easy to just come off it straight away, but trying to reduce down how many you smoke a day. And it can definitely help your overall health.
Yeah. So my last question for you, Corinne, and I'm
No
going to let you
problem.
go in and answer some phone
Oh,
calls.
yeah, I've got
What
words.
what top tips? Well, I mean, you've already given some great tips here, but what top tips have you got for the newly diagnosed person if they would call you?
Yeah, I think one thing mainly to think about when you speak to the neurologist. I think there's a few things I suggest to people. We try to suggest making a list of maybe 3 to 5 questions, because you can go into an appointment and you can feel quite daunted, and sometimes your head can be swimming with so many different things. So I think top tip is to write a list of questions you want to ask the neurologist about any aspect of MS. You can also take someone to an appointment if you've been newly diagnosed. It can feel quite daunting. It can help to have an extra set of ears. Now, I do say this to people, and it depends if the neurologist doesn't mind, but I did listen to an interesting article by a neurologist that we know, and he actually said that you can also record the meeting on your phone if you want to record it, if they don't mind being recorded, so that you can listen back a bit later, because it can feel quite daunting at the time.
Yeah.
And another thing as well, don't be afraid to ask questions about terminology, because some of the terms can be quite confusing, and we're not all medically trained, we're not all neurologists, and I think sometimes they forget that. And this is something you've suddenly been diagnosed with. So if there's any term that you don't understand, or if you feel it feels a bit frightening, what does this word mean? Ask them what it means. So that's something, definitely with the neurologist appointments, prepare for it. Take somebody along, maybe make some notes, and don't be afraid to ask questions. And maybe don't be afraid to ask their opinions. If they suddenly say to you, right, there's these 3 drugs, what you're given these choice, maybe ask them, what one would you recommend for my level of MS? Don't be afraid to ask questions, because it can be quite short, the appointment, and you don't want to come away feeling confused. And I think that, and don't be afraid to give us a call. If you want to give us a call, and we can talk through things and use our website. And there's a newly diagnosed section on the website that we do suggest for people. And it covers everything, but also it can help just to talk to somebody. We're always here. I'll just quickly do a spiel, Helena, for us. We're not open at the weekends. We're open Monday to Friday, 9 till 5. But we have a answer phone set over the weekend. So, do feel free to leave a message, and one of us will give you a call back on Monday morning.
Yeah. And there's no stupid questions, are there? There's
Nothing stupid. No, absolutely. We hear all sorts of questions, and we don't think that any question is stupid. No, you can just ask anything, absolutely anything. Yeah.
And I think I know you guys so well by now that some of you actually like a weird of a trickier question. So you have to go away and do a bit of research as well and try and find some answers, because we've had over the years, there's been some very straightforward questions, but there have also been some very off the kilter type questions, which I know
really
that the people actually really have to do a bit of research to do, but they quite enjoy that, don't they?
That's right. That is something we can get our teeth into, and something that's totally different that we've not heard about before. Absolutely. Yep. Don't worry. No questions and if we don't know, we can try and find out for you the answer. Don't be afraid to approach your MS nurse as well, from a medical point of view. But we can also do some research for you and find papers or all sorts of things. Absolutely. Yeah.
You do provide an absolutely brilliant service. Thank you so much for everything you do, Corinne.
Oh, no problem at all, Helen. I know it's been really lovely talking. Okay.
You take care.
All right, you too. Bye. Bye.
Now, if this was a commercial podcast, here's where there would be an advert. But as you know by now, we're a charity, so we don't do that. So instead, we'd like to take the opportunity to tell you all about our fantastic resources for people with MS.
Yeah, so go ahead and go to our website, which is mstrust.org.uk. On there, you'll find lots and lots of helpful information and resources for people affected by MS.
And if you are newly diagnosed and want to find out about MS, there's a section on our website called Newly Diagnosed.
You can also find a resource on there called Making Sense of MS, which is completely dedicated to being newly diagnosed. So you can order that via a digital copy, or you can also order a physical copy too, and both copies are free. So next up, we've got Lena Nielsen, which is super exciting. So she's going to tell us all about her diagnosis and how she handles living with MS.
So I am very excited about this interview that we got now. I got athlete Lina Nielsen with me here on the podcast, and we're going to be talking a little bit about her MS journey so far, and diagnosis, and what has been going on in her life. But I'm going to be quiet now and let you talk instead, Lina. Do you like to introduce yourself and sort of tell us a little bit about your connection to MS? And
yeah, sure. So as you said, I'm Lina Nielsen. I am a professional track and field athlete, which I sometimes have to pinch myself when I say that, because it was my dream when I was just a little girl, and it's something I'm living right now. So very, very fortunate that I can do that and call it a job, which is great. I run the 400 meter hurdles, so not the easiest of track events, but I love the challenge, so I'll give it a go. And my connection with MS, I started experiencing MS symptoms or relapses when I was 13, so pretty young. This was back in 2009. Which is a long time ago. And then about 4 years after that, so when I was 17, I experienced a few more symptoms and then got diagnosed with relapsing remitting MS. So I've been living with the diagnosis now for almost 10 years. Just navigating life and living this crazy journey that we're all on.
So you were diagnosed really young then. Was it tricky to get a diagnosis, or was it fairly sort of straightforward?
It was quite tricky. I mean, I've been fortunate enough to talk to a few people recently, and I've been connected to a lot of people that have MS. And even 5 years ago, it was quite tricky to diagnose MS, and we're talking 10 years ago now. So I had almost 4 relapses until they could figure out that something wasn't quite right. And then we did 2 MRI scans. I said no to the lumbar puncture, which a lot of people obviously do. I said no because I was so young, and I said I don't want to do that. So they had to find other ways to, test. So a bit of stubbornness on my side. And then they end up coming up with the diagnosis. And it was the symptoms I was experiencing were pretty, textbook of MS. So once I got the diagnosis, it started to all make sense. Yeah.
And what was the first symptoms that you experienced?
Yeah, so when I was 13, it was left. So my left arm was just experiencing weakness. I was telling the doctors, I remember so clearly, I was in hospital, and when you're 13, you already struggle with sentences and finding out how you express yourself. Yeah. And I was saying to the doctors and nurses, I can move my fingers but I can't move my arm, and they were like, are you doing this to get out of school? What's actually wrong with you? And I was like, I don't know what's wrong with me. That's kind of why I'm here. So it was a very strange relapse to have, because there was certain movements I could do and certain movements I couldn't do. I remember not being able to lift my arm past like 90 degrees, but being able to move my fingers just fine. So it was so strange. And then when I was 17, I experienced double vision for the first time. That was, the onset was about 3 days, and then I experienced it for about 3 days and then recovered after 3 days. So it was very quick. But I was studying my A-levels at the time, so it was a concern for me. Yeah. And then the next relapse I had, which is the most scary relapse I've had, and luckily I've been felt healthier since then, was complete right-sided weakness on the whole right side of my body. So it meant obviously not being able to walk, not being able to hold a pen. I was still doing my A-levels, just not being able to walk or run. So that was really, really scary, and that's what consequently led to the diagnosis. So those were the first symptoms that I experienced.
And what are your symptoms like now, day to day?
So I'm pretty fortunate enough to not be experiencing symptoms day to day. So I feel like I have quite a mild form of relapsing remitting. I'm still kind of feeling a little bit of weakness on the right side from my recent relapse. So the most recent symptom that I had was left-sided numbness, and then at the same time right-sided weakness, which wasn't too bad. It was just a little slight weakness, but then I also had spasms like on my bicep. So I'm still kind of like experiencing sometimes if I do a bit too much running, I can feel those spasms coming. Or if I'm doing, so I just finished a gym session, and when I was doing bench press, like I was looking up at my right arm and it was shaking, and my left arm was fine. So just things like that, really minor things, I can still go about, I'm still, in the gym lifting and stuff. So it's really, really minor. And I feel like it's just, residual kind of experiences from the last relapse I had. So really, really fortunate that I can still, do my job and train and stuff. And I'll always count my blessings for that. But other than that, I was healthy for 5 years, almost forgot that I had MS because it was so long that I didn't experience any symptoms. So day to day, I'm pretty healthy.
Oh, that's good. So did you know about MS when you were diagnosed? Did you know anyone else with the condition, or had you heard much about it?
No, I feel like it's the story with a lot of people. We don't really hear much about MS. And the earlier instance that I'd heard about it, I was studying biology for my A-levels at the time, and there were 4 modules. I remember one was about plants and stuff, and the other one was about the muscular system, and then the third module was at the brain and the nervous system. And so we had a case study about MS, and it was the classic like really sad tale that you hear. It was completely paralyzed and things like that. So I was really scared, because that's the only thing I'd heard about MS was this really sad kind of like story, and that's the only thing I knew. I didn't know anyone who had it, and it was one of those things where I felt like this is resonating with a lot of people. You don't think it's going to happen to you, and then it happens to you. And then you're like, wait, me? But no, I'm, I run around in circles, and I'm so fit and I'm so healthy. I've never smoked. To that point, I was 17, so I'd never drank, not even a glass of wine at Christmas. Like I'd never even touched alcohol. So I was like, I'm so healthy. Like, why is this happening? So it was a very scary time. And at the time I was like, okay, let me try and learn about MS. And I was Googling things and looking for resources, and I'd come across the MS Trust and other kind of MS organizations. And there was so much information, and I was so overwhelmed, and I just ended up ignoring it for about 2 to 3 years. So still, when I was diagnosed, didn't know much about it. I just kind of put it in the back of my mind. And now I'm really understanding a lot more about it, because I'm so fortunate, to be in connection with MS Trust, and I've been connecting with so many people, and now I feel like I'm really almost consuming everything about it. I'm healthy enough to do that now. I'm in a good headspace for it.
Well, I mean, like you said, when you're 17 or when you're a teenager, you've got so much stuff going on anyway to try and get your head around something like that. And especially it's getting more common now that people are getting diagnosed at a younger age, but it's still, I don't know what it was like for you, because 10 years ago, they would have still sort of said, oh, it's, people in their 30s or 40s getting diagnosed. So it must have been quite hard to sort of, you wouldn't see yourself in that group of people. When I was diagnosed, there used to be people sort of thinking of really old people. And I was 29 when I was diagnosed, so, older than you, but it still didn't feel like, oh, that's not me, So how did you explain MS to people around you?
It was quite tricky. I mean, luckily I had such an amazing group of friends, and we were all in the same biology class, so we all knew what it was. It took me a while to actually voice that I had it. Like I remember just being so scared and saying, if I don't say it out loud, then it might not exist. I don't have to accept it just now. I was in such, now when I look back at it, I was in such denial, but I didn't know that at the time. One of the first people I told was my biology teacher, who's actually now a close friend of mine, but I told her at the time, and she completely understood what it was straight away. It kind of explained what I was going through, because I still went to school with, not being able to hold a pen and limping through the corridors and dragging my right foot to try and get from class to class. So she kind of was like, okay, this kind of explains what happened. But other than that, I didn't tell a lot of people. So, there wasn't much explaining to do. And when I did tell people, it was just like, I have MS. and that's it. I'm not going to say anything else because it already took so much of my energy to just say those 2 letters. So yeah, I didn't explain it much at the start. I feel like I'm doing a lot of explaining at the moment because I've started to be more vocal about it. But I explain it kind of in the simplest ways possible because it's such a complex condition to understand, even within yourself, you know, when you're going through symptoms, it's so hard to explain exactly what you're going through because they're just unlike any other sensation that people experience. So it's a lot of waffling about, and it's a lot of kind of, you know, trying to break it down. But yeah, I feel like I'm starting to understand my best way of expressing my kind of MS because it's so different for everyone.
Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine what it would be, because obviously you said you didn't you kept it to yourself back in those days, but then it was last year when you sort of broke the news to the world as such, and it got such attention. I mean, that must be so strange because it's not like just coming out your normal MS coming out story where suddenly the press is on your doorstep. It must have been very strange.
That was a really strange time, and I feel like I was going through so much at that moment when I decided to tell the world. I guess I didn't realize it was going to be so such a big area of interest. So what happened was I went to the World Championships, and it was my first ever World Championships, and I was one of the favourites to make the final. So when I had my relapse and I realised I wasn't going to even be able to get to the semis, I flew back home because I wanted to be in the best place possible to recover from like previous relapses. I know that the best thing to do is, you know, fuel myself, have the tools to let my body heal and rest. So I told the team, can you fly me back home, please? And like, I'm so grateful because they spent thousands to send me back home. So I was so grateful. And then I was talking to my close friends and my family, and I was like, you know what, this might be a good time to kind of like explain to people, because I've experienced relapses throughout my whole track career. And I thought this might be a good time because you can go and watch that race and you can go and see that my right leg isn't quite as strong as the left leg, and I'm not racing as well as I was in the season. And I thought it would just, you know, provide an explanation. So I contacted a journalist that I trusted, and I said, hey, I want to release this story. And then once he released that story, it was just whirlwind. It was all the major newspapers were reaching out to the agency that I was with. I was being contacted by Turkish newspapers, Finnish, Swedish, Norwegian, Brazilian. Like, I couldn't believe that it was the whole world. And I just thought, why is this such a big deal? And then I realized it's because we don't hear a lot about MS. And so it was quite a misunderstanding as to what it was that I was going through. And I guess when you do hear about MS, it's not usually such a, I guess, positive story, if that's a good use of word. So it was kind of like, okay, now we're seeing it in a different light. And it was, I guess it was, now that I look back at it, it was just so interesting because it was so different. And it was a lot to deal with. I think I was going up autopilot at the time, and I was not really thinking things through. I was just, you know, doing everything. But it was, I think now that I look back at it, because at the time I thought, what have I done? What have I done? I'm so vulnerable. Like, everyone knows everything about me now. But now that I look back at it, the amount of people that I feel like I might have impacted, even if it's just 1 or 2 or 3 people, for me, that's worth it. Because when I got diagnosed, I wish that I had someone, and I did have someone, thankfully, to look up to and to kind of get some motivation from, and to show me that it's not going to be super sad and it's not going to be scary. And so now that I look back at it, I'm proud of myself for doing it. But at the time I was like, what have I done?
Like, I can't imagine, because I mean, the attention it got was, like you said, it was just in all news outlets everywhere, and especially when you're then kind of getting over a relapse and things in the middle. It's not like, you know, you're calling up HR and says, I need a few days off sick. You suddenly have got the whole press calling you down. But did you feel you had emotional support around that time?
I did. And you know what, one of the things I say to a lot of people is, if I didn't have the love and support around me, and it wells me up every single time I talk about it, because these were people that knew me and they knew my journey and stuff. So I still had my close circle. My partner was, like, honestly the best person that I could ask for at the time, because I'd only been with him for 3 years, and it had been 5 years that I was healthy. So he had never experienced a relapse with me. So it was quite a lot for him to understand as well. And I was just loved and supported. My sister was such a great support. She was still at the World Championships herself, you know, she still had to do the relay, and she was still competing, and she was checking on me every day at like 2 o'clock in the morning her time, because she was 8 hours behind and things like that. Like, it was honestly, the best thing, your close circle might not understand. You're the only person who's going to understand. I'm talking to someone who's got MS, you know, you're the only person who's going to understand your experience, and so you can't have someone take the pain away for you or something, but you can have that love and support around you to kind of give you a little bit more positivity and a little bit more light for you to start to heal mentally and emotionally and to get through that. And so if I didn't have that around me, I just think I would have broken down. And when I was at the World Championships, track and field is such a lonely sport in itself. You know, you have your own lane and your own hurdles. Yeah. It's always really lonely. And so when I was in Oregon and I was waiting to fly back home, I think I had to wait 2 days, and I could feel my relapse getting worse and worse and worse. And all the track athletes are focusing on their heats and their semis and their finals. And I really had no one. And I felt myself breaking down. I was like, I am going to be in such a dark hole. And as soon as I flew home and I had my mum around me, my dog, who was such a light of joy for me, and my partner, like when I had that love and support around me, everything changed. I was suddenly a little bit, you know, hopeful, and I was ready to, you know, heal and waiting for that relapse to kind of subside. And it was a little bit more positive. So yeah, definitely the love and support around me was the major thing that helped me get through not just the relapse, but obviously all the media attention as well, and to heal from losing my World Championships as well, which is another thing that
of course. Yeah, because that's, you know, that's your job. So that must be, that's not everything at once. It must have been. Well, I'm glad to hear that you had the support though, and we do hear a lot of great stories about dogs being emotional support. I think that it's lovely to hear.
He got me out of bed in the morning, even though I couldn't walk him properly. I was still walking him. So he got me out of bed in the morning.
That's so important though, isn't it? It's that kind of shows getting a routine in there and doing things. So with obviously I saw from working from an MS organization and looking after, one of the things I do is I look after one of the Facebook groups that we have. I mean, there was a huge big sort of big support for you. I think people were just like, wow, you know, somebody speaking up and wow, and good on you and things. But was the attention mostly positive, do you think, from the MS community, or supportive?
I didn't realise there was a Facebook group. I'm going to have to go search that up now.
Yes.
I'm going to go search that up. I tried to make sure I was reading every single like thing that was sent to me. I mean, my Instagram DMs blew up. Instagram's like my main platform, and I made sure, I think I spent 5 hours one day responding to every single message, because a lot of them were from people who experienced MS, maybe not themselves, but from family members as well. So I had people, you know, talking about their parents who, you know, live with MS and stuff, and it was really, really positive stuff. And a lot of the messages were from people who kind of have, you know, the invisible illness. So you don't know that they're walking around, you know, experiencing numbness on one leg or something like that. So they felt seen, you know, because it's like such a, you don't, you know, realize that people are living with this. And a lot of it was from people who were, you know, scared that running a 5K every Saturday would make them worse. And I'm like, I train every day and I'm, you know, I'm okay. And just things, it was mainly motivation that I got from people. You know, people were saying, I feel like I can go do this now. I'm going to go join my five-a-side football team. I'm going to go back to that, and just things like that. And it was really, really, it made me cry, some of the messages I was just, because it was so heartfelt. People didn't just send 1 or 2 sentences. It was full paragraphs, you know, of things. And it was really nice. And I didn't even expect that. So it was really, really nice. And they kind of gave me a purpose to keep going. Like when I came back from the World Championships, I still had the Commonwealth Games and I still had the European Championships. I got selected for all 3. And in my head, I was thinking I might just pull out of all of them. I'm not healthy. I'm going to take some time to recover from this. But then I thought, you know what, I'm going to go and I'm going to run slow. And that's fine. And I'm just going to do it for these people, you know, to go and show them that you don't have to be afraid if you're not in your best shape. And I might run 3 or 4 seconds slower than what I can do, but I felt like I had a purpose. And if it wasn't for all those people who reached out and sent messages to me, I feel like I would have pulled out of those championships. So they gave me a reason to keep going. And I'm really, really, really grateful for that, and really grateful that people took the courage to send the message out. Because I remember when I got diagnosed, it was so scary for me to send a DM to Kadina Cox, who ended up being my inspiration and my light of hope. I contemplated it for about 3 or 4 days. Just, do I send her a message? And I finally took the courage to do that. And I know how courageous it can be to reach out to someone you don't know and you know, give them your whole kind of worries and life story. And I really appreciate everyone that didn't reach out to me for doing that, because I know how hard it can be.
It's lovely to hear that there was so much positivity, because obviously Kadina has spoken out about some people being quite sort of trolling her and saying things like, oh, do you really have MS, and things like that, which is really awful.
Yeah, I had one hater, and the thing is, like, I maybe estimate 500 good messages and one bad message. And it was the bad message that I remembered for so long, and I thought, you know what, I'm just gonna think that person has a horrible experience of life, who just wants to spread that horrible experience. Yeah. But I had one, and I can imagine how hard it is, because I thought about that message for so long, just that one hater compared to the 500. And it wasn't so much, they thought I was using MS to get media attention, and I was like, what? No, that's not what I'm doing. I don't want this. But you know, that's what the message was. I know Kadina, I know she's on her TikTok, which I follow her, and she has to explain herself so many times, and it's so unfair, because it is known as the invisible condition. You know, half the time you don't see the relapses or the symptoms that people experience. We shouldn't have to explain ourselves. You know, our experience is our experience, and it's so different from, you know, within the relapsing remitting MS, there are so many different experiences, and it's really unfair that she has to explain herself. But at the same time, I feel like we need more people to share exactly what symptoms they're going through, because it is so difficult to understand. And so the more and more people that can share exactly what MS is like, the more people will understand it. And so I hope that I can somehow fulfill a little bit of that role in showing my experience with MS.
And I think that's the interesting thing. If you follow you on Instagram, I follow Kadina as well, and you really see how up and down it is. And I feel I use Instagram as my own kind of little diary of what I do and things like that. And you can sort of go back and look at posts and go, oh yeah, I was really struggling there, and then I felt great here. And I think it does show, because I feel like if people who complain, they might have seen one competition or something, and they go, oh, she can run really fast. But you know, Kadina uses a wheelchair now and again, and they might not know that, you know. And I feel like it's just that one snippet is just one snippet of someone's life. But when you have relapsing remitting MS, it really is peaks and troughs the whole time, isn't it? So I think keep on sharing. It's really important for everyone to see that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
But because MS is so varied, do you feel any sort of pressure on trying to represent MS, or sort of all aspects of the condition?
Yeah, you know, the one thing I get scared of, and I really try to choose my words very carefully, because I'm so scared of offending those who have, you know, a little bit of a harder time with MS. So I try to be really sensitive in that respect. I try to accommodate for all the types of MS, and it's really hard sometimes, because I'll talk about myself and then realise, you know, that sometimes people with relapsing MS might not make a full recovery, and I would say I've made 95% recovery from my relapses. I still have a slightly weaker right side. I'll always have a slightly weaker right side. I still have brain fog sometimes, so things like that. But other than that, you know, I'm still able to run fast on a world stage, and I have to be careful to not say everyone can do this, because it's not the case. It's so different, and that's the one pressure that I'm putting on myself, is that I don't want to seem inconsiderate and insensitive to others who have, you know, even progressive MS, you know. So I just want to share that which is why I keep saying this is my version, or this is my story of MS, and just to show a little bit of one side of it. So that's the only thing that I'm really, really careful of, and I'm hoping that I'm not offending anyone by sharing it. That's the only thing. But other than that, I think I have a sort of I guess responsibility to kind of, you know, share MS and using the platform that I have. I know it's not the biggest of platforms, but I have a small platform, and I hope that I can use that to shed a little bit more light on MS, and to hopefully share a little bit of positivity on MS. And that's the one thing that I want to do.
Excellent. So with training, and you're a yoga teacher as well, are you?
I am. Yeah.
So training and competitions and MS, how do you sort of get a nice balance in life and with all the things that are going on, because there clearly is quite a lot.
Sometimes I have to tell myself I need rest. You know, the one thing obviously that people with MS are just fatigued, like a bit more fatigued than the general public. I get so tired. Like last week, for example, was a tough week. I was so tired. I was so fatigued. I remember just being moody as well because I was just so tired. So I take rest really seriously, like really seriously. So for that reason, I'm putting yoga teaching on the back step this year, which is sad for me, but I know it's one of the right things to do going into hopefully another World Championships and then hopefully the Olympic Games, is to make sure that I'm resting. And so I have this ring which tracks my sleep. I wind down every evening at like 7, don't do anything, read a lot. And I'm really bad at napping, but I'm trying to nap a bit more. But the main thing for me is to rest, listen to my body and make sure that I'm not doing too much. But yeah, I try not to do too much in one day. Training takes priority always. And then with the yoga teaching, it's taking the back step. And then, I try not to do too much in 1 week. So for example, this podcast was my priority for this week, and I'm doing nothing else in terms of like publicity or projects that I'm doing. And just things like that, setting boundaries, just to kind of give myself time to rest and be human as well.
Oh, that's really important. Made us feel very special that we're running priorities as well. That's brilliant. No, and rest, it is so important, isn't it? Because I think quite often when you struggle with fatigue, you tend to be like, oh, I'm having a good day today, so I'm going to do everything today. And then you really crash and burn the next day. So it's kind of hard to stop when you're actually having a good day and kind of go, no, I can't take tomorrow's energy as well. But it's but I mean, you 10 years down since diagnosis, did you say? I mean, it does get a little bit easier, doesn't it, to sort of to plan ahead with life and sort of get to know your body better. Because I don't know about you, but in the beginning I didn't know what my body was doing with different symptoms, and I couldn't recognize them, and it was quite scary. Whilst now it's still not always fun, but it's easier to recognize.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, at the beginning of, I'd say, my MS journey, I had no idea. I was 17. I had no idea how to even live life. And I wasn't really fueling my body properly. And then I had so many different symptoms and relapses, from vertigo to double vision to loss of coordination, like so many different things. And it was all in succession. It was like one relapse would go, and then 2 weeks later I'd have another one. And I was like, what is going on? And it was really scary. And then that's when I started finding yoga, and I started to really think about healthy eating. I started researching what exactly is going on in the body when you have an MS relapse and things like that. And so using my knowledge through sport, when you have a sprained ankle, for example, what do you do to heal that? And then started to approach relapses in the same way. So there's an area of inflammation in the brain. What is going to reduce inflammation in my body? And so I started fueling my body with things like that. Even if it helped 0.1%, I was going to do it. And then I feel like I started to understand my body, started to understand when I was fatigued, and then really take a step back. It's okay to take the weekend off of training. You're not going to change much, and things like that. And then I felt like that was why I had 5 healthy years, was because I really started to understand through trial and error exactly what works best with my body. And that's exactly why after the World Championships, I begged the team to send me home, because I just knew being in that team environment was not going to help me heal. I needed to be at home. I needed to have, we were in America, and I don't particularly like American food. Like I could taste the additives. So I was like, send me home. I need to have like the building blocks for my body to heal from this relapse. And so I've healed pretty quickly. So from the onset, and then having the relapse, and then coming out of that relapse, it was quite quickly. I don't think it would have happened had I not gone home. So things like that, like really understanding yourselves. And I was fortunate enough to talk to Dr. Perez recently, and she also advised people with MS to keep some sort of log or some sort of diary, or really try to understand the patterns that you go through in your body, so you can really start to feed your body in terms of nutrition and rest and things like that, the way that you know best. And we say this as a sports person, only you know your body. So if you feel that your foot is tight one day on the track, you tell your coach, my foot is tight, I don't think I'm going to do that exercise today. It's the same thing with MS. You wake up, I feel a little bit tired today. You could tell someone at work, I might not be my best performance today, and you're the only person that can recognize that. So really taking the time to understand your body, and it's quite a long process. I feel like it might take a year or 2 years, but once you start to really connect with yourself, I feel like you can start to navigate life with MS a whole lot better.
So actually being an athlete probably worked to your advantage there, with actually having to communicate issues about your body anyway to other people.
And yeah, that's why I always say, like, sport has been my savior. I really do feel like it has. And even with like yoga, for example, we always hear about the mind-body connection, you know, so to really understand the little minor things that are happening in your body. So I one time had a really, really minor relapse. I could barely figure it out for myself. And I figured it out, and I was like, if I didn't know my body well, I'd go through life not knowing that this was a relapse. But it was like my right kind of hamstring glute area was that there was no nerves firing in that area, but I could still walk and stuff, because you could use your calf and you can use your quad, and we have something called neuroplasticity in the brain, so your brain finds other ways to move things. So I would never have realized, had I not, you know, been doing sport, that there was a relapse going on somewhere in that area of my body. So yeah, things like that. And then also we go through so many niggles and injuries as an athlete. So I just sprained my ankle about 2 weeks ago. And so straight away we go into fixing mode. Okay, what am I going to do? I'm going to tape up the ankle. I'm going to ice the ankle. I'm going to do this. So we're very used to fixing our bodies, you know, in the best way we know how. So when it comes to relapse, I know it's not the same, but I treat it the same as an injury. You know, what do I need? I need to rest my ankle. So I'm going to rest my body, you know, I'm going to take anti-inflammatories and things like that. So yeah, it's kind of given me the tools, not only physically but mentally, to deal with relapses, because we go through so many setbacks as a sports person anyway. So I call my relapses setbacks. So I treat it as a setback, and I know that it's going to be okay one day. You're going to be fine. You know, you can keep moving forwards.
I quite like that, calling a relapse setback. Actually, it's quite, I might steal that. I quite like it.
It was actually the idea behind my first tattoo. Was I had so many relapses. I was 21, and so my first tattoo is an arrow. So the further you pull back an arrow, the further it goes. So I'm being pulled back right now, but I'm going to go even further than I did before. So that's my
I love that.
life. Yeah,
that's
my daily reminder every time I see it.
Oh, that's really good to have things to motivate you. I mean, clearly you got lots of exciting plans for the years ahead now. What you're training for. So how are you feeling about sort of looking ahead?
Yeah. You know, I'm actually in a really good place right now. I'm so fortunate to have a sports psychologist who also kind of ventures a little bit into, you know, therapy. And I remember kind of starting my winter training, which starts in around October. So I had a month to heal from my relapse, and it took quite a while to heal from that relapse. It was very strange. I felt like I was running sideways for a long time because it was right-sided weakness. And I remember a month into winter training talking to my sports psychologist and saying, I don't think I can do this. Like, my body's not the same. I'm never going to get back to where I was before the World Championships. And he turns around to me and he goes, we're not trying to go backwards. We're moving forwards. And I was like, you know what? You're right. We're moving forwards. I'm not going back to the shape I was. I'm a whole different athlete now. That was a really painful experience for me to experience the World Championships the way that I did. So we rephrase what pain means to me. And so now no training session will ever be as hard as what I had to experience at the World Championships. So now I'm approaching training a whole lot differently. I definitely feel stronger for that experience. And so now I'm in a really good place. I'm training so well. We're hoping to go to the World Championships in August, which will be in Budapest. And then if that goes well, hopefully I'll be at the Olympic Games the year after. Wow. But I was really close to the last Olympic Games. The way it works is it's 3 athletes per event, and I was the 4th person who didn't go.
Oh wow. So
I was
close.
very, very close. So I'm not going to let that happen this time round. I'm going to work as hard as I can to make it to those Olympic Games, and then see what happens after that.
We were very excited when we saw pictures of you with your monkey socks on as well.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that was another person, like a company that reached out to me, and I was like, you know what, let's just do it. And I wore the socks at the European Championships last summer. So yeah, and that gained a lot of publicity as well. So I'm happy. Oh, yeah, bright pink socks. Way to go.
Well, they're the brilliant socks. I wear them when I go running. I had them when I ran the London Marathon, and yeah, you do feel very proud to see
everyone can the socks, and then they go, oh, what are they for? And then suddenly you're learning about MS. You never know, one person more can learn a little bit more. Yeah,
I like, because they also have like the different socks because of different parts of the body being affected, sort of often the right or the left hand side. So I like the sort of the ethos behind that. I'm going to pop a little link to them in the podcast show notes if people have no idea what we're talking about.
monkey socks. Oh, what?
Monkey socks. So obviously we can't not talk about training and running. I mean, looking at your face when you're talking about it, you just shine out. Do you find that it helps with dealing with MS symptoms, training and working out?
I do. I really feel like movement is medicine. So when I finished my European champ, so last year was a very strange year, and we'll never have a year like that ever again, in that we had 3 championships in one summer because of the pandemic. Everything got forwards. So it was a very busy summer. And so when I finished the European Championships, I crossed the line. I didn't even cool down. Like, as an athlete, you always cool down. I was like, you know what? I'm just done. I'm so finished with this. But not once did I rest. You know, everyone was like, oh, you can, you know, rest. I mean, I say rest as in like rest from training. So people were like, yeah, you can, you know, you don't have to run now. I was like, no, I'm going to keep running. That's the one non-negotiable that I have, is to keep running, because I kind of treat, like I said, I treat relapses like injuries. So for example, when you have a sprained ankle, the one thing, once the swelling goes down and the pain goes down, the one thing people will tell you is to stand on the ankle, to introduce a little bit more mobility exercises through the ankle to get the ankle moving. Otherwise, you'll always have a stiff ankle for the rest of your life. So when you have a sprained ankle, they say to move the ankle. And so when I have a relapse, the one thing I tell myself is to move that area as much as I can, because obviously a lot of relapses that we experience are loss of movement. So even though my right leg, when I came back from Oregon, so the first championships, wasn't as strong as the left leg, I would still go and do high knees to try and get my right knee as high as the left. And it was kind of like this at first, you know, the right leg being a little bit drooped compared to the left. But every day I was telling myself, move that right leg, move that right leg. When I got to the Commonwealth Games, it still wasn't fully, you know, the same as the left. But I think I was telling myself, just go and run. It was very, very tricky race to kind of do, because I wasn't lifting my right leg as much as I could my left. And then when I was at the Europeans, I could lift the right leg as high as the left, but it was a slower movement on the right leg. So the movement was there. It was taking a little bit longer to initiate that movement. So things like that. So I would always just tell myself to keep moving, to kind of retrain that area of the brain, to train those nerves to kind of, you know, keep using these nerves. We need these nerves. So I treat it kind of the same as I would a sprained ankle. So for me, movement is a non-negotiable. Even when I had my most major relapses when I was 17, I was still trying to move as much as I could. Even if the movement doesn't show physically, to have that initiation in the brain, which is where, you know, you're getting those areas of information, I think is really, really crucial. And I think it's the first step to a healing process for those who have relapsing remitting MS.
Do you think, because obviously motivation doesn't seem to be a problem for you, because the way you're thinking about this, but for people who want to get started, to get moving, because we always talk about, like, it's not about having to, you know, run a marathon or go sprinting. You know, any movement is good as a starting point, but if often it's that mental barrier of getting started. Have you got any sort of good tips for that?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many times, not just for a sports person, but for a sports person with MS, where I just feel like I do not want to do this. I don't want to do this. You wake up and you're just thinking, I don't. So for example, the first few weeks of winter training, I thought, this is pointless. You know, my career is over, because I was still experiencing like a weakness on the right side. And I just thought, I'm never going to get back, because I was bouncing back from relapses before quite quickly. This took a longer time. And so I thought, there's no motivation. I can't be asked, you know, there's no point. And the one thing that I found that helped me was to just put my workout clothes on, you know, to put my training gear on, or to put my training bag out the night before, so that I know that the bag is at the door ready for me to go. And that was even hard on itself. And there was times where I'd be putting on my kit and crying, because I just thought, this is pointless. There's no point me doing this. But once you step foot out the door, it's a lot easier, you know, to just get that first bit. So it's like climbing a ladder, you know, the first rung is quite hard, and then you just keep climbing rung by rung, you know, just bit by bit. And it was really, really tricky, and it's not something that I shared a lot on Instagram, but the first few weeks were really, really hard for me to find that motivation. But then I just found myself in a routine. So every morning I'd wake up, put my workout clothes on, and try and do something better the next day. And it's never going to be easy. If it was easy, everyone would do it. That's my quote. It's never going to be easy, but it's your personal journey. And even if you just walk out the door and take yourself to the gym, stand at the gym door and walk back home, you already did more than you did yesterday. And so I would say just be patient with yourself. It does get better, and you do start to learn. So for example, I don't lift as heavy as some of the other girls in my group, and that's fine for me. It's my journey. And so you start to become okay with where you are in your life right now. And the only way you're going to learn to be okay with yourself doing that is to just take your own steps. And so that's the one thing that I would say to anyone who has a loss of motivation. We all have a loss of motivation. It's completely normal. So don't feel alone in that. Like we all struggle with motivation. And the main thing is to just do it step by step. Just put your workout clothes on, and you might even put your workout clothes on and say, no, not today, take them off. And then next day you put the workout clothes on, walk out the door, walk down the street, and then walk back. And then, you know, that's even more than you did yesterday. And, you know, for some people it happens in 5 days, and for some people it takes 6 months, and that's fine. And that's what I love about yoga as well, is that it's such a journey. You know, you might start with, you know, being able to forward fold, and then the next day you turn that into a sun salutation. So that's also another beautiful journey to do as well. It's slower movement like yoga.
And I guess speaking of journeys, sort of your journey, isn't it? It's easy to compare to other people what they can do and then things, but actually kind of just focus on your own path.
But yeah, and it took me a long time to get there, because obviously I have an identical twin sister who's got world medals, and she's been to the Olympic Games, and it's really hard to compare what my life could have been, because obviously she is a carbon copy of me, and I'm like, that could have been me. But at the same time, you know, I had to take away that comparison. And one of my favorite quotes is, comparison is the thief of joy. And be okay in my journey. Like, I feel like my purpose in life is so different, and so that took me a long time, because obviously she's exactly like me, and it's hard not to compare. And so it took me a long time to tell myself to not compare. And, you know, I'd love to break a world record, but I know that's not going to happen for me. So, you know, being okay with your journey and where you are is and that's where you start to find the joy in what you're doing, and knowing that you can go home and sleep proud because you did something that for yourself today is the main thing that can make you feel happy.
It must be hard. My mum was an identical twin, and she got compared to her sister all the time, and I think she felt sometimes that she wasn't even treated as one person. It was the twins all the time. I mean, that must be quite tricky situation to be in.
And at the start of my track career, so I had experienced all those relapses at 17. I turned professional when I was 20, and so I'd obviously been diagnosed with MS before that, and I had my relapses before that, so I wasn't as fast as my sister. And so I'd always get asked, why are you not as fast as your sister? Why are you the slower twin? And I'm like, there's an explanation, I just couldn't say it. And now people understand that, and I feel like people who ask me that are now feeling really bad about themselves. Because now you know I had to experience right-sided paralysis, and I had to experience that. So that was really hard at the start, because it was constant questions like, why is your sister going to the World Championships and you're not going? And it was just awful. So that was really tricky in itself, and then obviously to be dealing with MS at the same time is a whole different layer.
I do find it very strange sometimes when you hear people talking about comparison, because I've heard when people read stories about yourself or like Kadina, sometimes they go, oh, my friends are like, if they can do this and they have MS, why are you not doing it? But I'm not comparing my husband with, I don't know, Bolt, or, saying, well, you're able-bodied, why can't you run as fast as he? I mean, we're all different people. Just because we happen to have MS, we're not going to be all lumped in the same kind of category as it comes to whatever our abilities are. I find it a very strange thing to say.
Weird. Why we always compare people, it's so strange.
No, exactly. We should just focus on the people's journey and be happy for them, or support them rather than compare them to others, I think. But hey ho. So as we're talking today about sort of worried you have MS and symptoms and things, if there's somebody listening to this podcast who might be thinking that some of these symptoms sounds quite familiar, what would your sort of advice be to them? What should they do?
Oh, that's a multifaceted question.
Yeah.
It is really hard, and one of the things that I noticed, I thought it was just me, but turns out it's quite a common experience, is we struggle with access to healthcare, which I know a lot of people with MS. I thought it was just my doctor. Turns out it was everyone's. So it's really hard to obviously reach out to a doctor when you're experiencing a relapse, and to say, hey, this is what's going on. And then they don't always give you, or they can't give you, an answer as to how to manage it. And so this is where I go back and talk about, tracking your symptoms, and realizing patterns and what's going on in your body, and then just taking the time to rest. When we have a relapse, obviously our body's going through something so major, and your body is designed to heal, so your body's trying to heal. With this inflammation, what's going on, there's something going on in the body that shouldn't be happening, and so your body is going through a lot, and you might experience that fatigue, but that's because your body is really working hard to figure out what is happening. So I would just say to take the rest and really just take the time to give your body the building blocks it needs to heal, or to be healthy. So healthy eating, I'm a massive advocate of healthy eating, eating those fatty acids and taking your omega-3s, your vitamin Ds and stuff, and to not compare your recovery to someone else's. So you might look at someone else and go, oh, but they had the exact same relapse as me and it took them 2 days to recover, and it's taken me 3 or 4 months. Try not to Google. That's one thing I've learned. Don't Google what happens if I have right-sided weakness, because you'll get such scary stories from these not great sources. So really just give your body time to heal, and it might be a few days, it might be a few weeks, it might be a few months, and use trusted sources. So definitely look up the resources that MS Trust offer. It's great resources that they have, and then obviously other organizations as well. Use trusted sources. Don't go on WebMD or any of them those websites. But yeah, just definitely give yourself and your body time and space, and not compare yourself with others who have the same symptoms.
Yeah, I think it's very easy to go down the route of Dr. Google, isn't it? And then suddenly you diagnosed yourself with some very strange conditions.
I've definitely experienced that before and learned it the hard way to not Google things. It's just not safe.
No, and like you say, I mean, it's getting a hold of a GP or a doctor can be tricky times. So it's be patient, but be persistent if you think that something is troubling. Just don't give up as well, I think. Right. Well, thank you so much for chatting to me today. It was really, really interesting. And thank you for sharing your story. And we're going to keep everything crossed for you. For your
fingers and toes. Thank you. I hope I can perform well next year. Yeah, it'll be good. This year.
This year. Yes, we're a month in now already.
And we are back. Helena, that was amazing. How was it chatting to Lina?
I was a little bit starstruck, I have to say. I thought it was very cool to be talking to her because she's just so amazing and very, very inspiring. I just thought a lot of her approach to life, even though she is a super duper athlete, and most of us people are not really super duper athletes, are we? But I just loved the way she was thinking of things with them. It's like how she was saying relapses or setbacks, and just kind of how she went about and thinking about it, and almost in the way that you treat your body like it is a machine and it needs sort of certain components to work. And I just thought it was very interesting talking to her. I afterwards I sort of sat down and I kind of thought, yes, I think I will really try and apply some of these ways in my own handling of MS.
I'm sure lots of people listening to this would think, well, I'm not an athlete. This doesn't mean anything for me. I can't relate to any of this. But actually, the way that Lena was talking, a lot of those messages will resonate with lots of people, because no matter what, when people are newly diagnosed, it's such a huge hurdle, isn't it? And there's such a swirling amount of information and decisions that you need to make at that point.
I like how you worked in hurdle there.
I wish I could say that was like intentional. It really wasn't.
Well, I think, Lena certainly has been jumping over a lot of hurdles, both professional and also medically. And I think, she was diagnosed at a really young age as well, and so much to deal with. And I mean, the way she had to sort of come out about her MS as well in the press, I mean, it's not like, nothing I had to deal with as well. So I think, she has dealt with an awful lot of pressure. But sort of taking it back to, everyday person with MS, the things to really think about is, like, if you are newly diagnosed, you don't know what's around the corner. Things with MS is so unique from person to person. And I think it's you shouldn't be thinking, well, I know this person, and therefore my MS is going to go the same way as that person. When I was diagnosed, my mum was very, very worried about me, just because my grandfather, her father-in-law, had MS, and she kind of thought, oh, is this the way you're going to be having to? I was just buying a house, so she was going, oh, but he was in a wheelchair, so therefore you need to go and buy yourself a bungalow or something instead, and she was making all these kind of decisions or suggestions to me, and it's like, we don't know what's going to happen, and so I think it's like, you shouldn't compare yourself to anyone else. Your MS journey is your MS journey. But I think it's important to listen to other people and sort of take bits that kind of you want to try to apply to your life. And then kind of really, when you're in this situation, that when you're newly diagnosed, yes, you have a diagnosis now, but really it hasn't changed you. Just because I had a diagnosis, it didn't change me. I'm still Helena. I'm going to sort of work on my life. And yes, it takes a little time to get your head around this. I mean, it takes years, to be honest, to sort of get to know your body and all these things for me. But it's a different journey for everyone. And I think, it's just listen and learn, but do it whichever way you want to do it.
Yeah, so important, isn't it? And keeping in mind that everyone's experiences are so different. As we said, no two people will experience exactly the same symptoms. No two people will go through the same thing. So that's why it is really important to make sure you access the health teams around you that you can, and also that you seek out that kind of expert information if you can't get hold of them too.
And I think, speaking to Corinne, I mean, they get a lot of calls specifically from people who are newly diagnosed, who are, I mean, like she said, some people are quite relieved because they have a diagnosis. Other people are distressed. It's a big mixture. So whatever you're feeling, it's okay. You're very entitled to feeling whatever you're feeling. You might be angry, and that's fine too. So, but do know that the inquiry line is there to sort of answer questions if you haven't seen an MS nurse, or if you can't get a hold of your health professional. Because that's what they do every day, and like she said, there's no stupid questions. We've had all kinds of questions pop up, so whatever you're feeling, do ask.
So if you do have any questions about MS, whether they be about being newly diagnosed or any other aspect of life with MS, you can get in contact with our helpline and inquiry service. You might get through to Corinne, who you've just heard this episode. You might get through to someone different. But you can go ahead and use that service. So that's between Monday to Friday, except UK bank holidays, and that's from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Outside of those hours, you can also leave us a message and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. The number is 0800 032 3839.
And you can also reach both the MS Trust and the inquiry line people on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter and Instagram. And you can find this podcast on Spotify, Google and Apple Podcast and Amazon Music. And I'm sure we are popping up in all kinds of different podcast listening places now. Please give us a follow. Please, give us a review, rate us, and please share, because we want to reach more people, especially with the newly diagnosed people. We would really love for them to know about the MS Trust and that we're here to help. And I would also like to finish off with saying, as always, a huge big thank you to Anne Chapman Audio for the music of this podcast. And see you later. Bye.
Bye.